Hi, everyone. I had a ton of questions yesterday that I was not able to get to, and I kind of went through some of those questions after the class. So I wanted to go ahead and give an opportunity to everybody to ask more questions, and also to get to some of the questions I did not get to yesterday. I'm not trying to avoid them. It's just there were so many coming through. I could not quite get to all of them in time. Some of the questions that came up yesterday were my thoughts on coronavirus in particular, and whether or not we were going to be in quarantine for the rest of the year. And I don't believe that we're going to be in quarantine for the rest of the year. I believe that we're likely going to be coming off quarantine here pretty soon. And I would say I'm hopeful that we're going to be done with quarantine, where we're on the stay-at-home order uh, around my birthday. So around May 18th. My birthday is May 16th, but May 18th is the Monday following. So I'm hoping that they'll give us the order to be able to do that. That would also be pretty cool because that's the pyramid slope angle day. 5184 is the actual date itself. So that would be, or the degree. So that would be May 18th. And I think quite symbolic. But I believe that the world is going to be impacted indelibly for what's happened with coronavirus. I think everyone is probably going through a bit of a change and metamorphosis ourselves. And I don't think that it's going to be something that's only a short-term change. I think it's going to be a long-term change. I think people are going to be, and we're already starting to see it, a little bit softer, a little bit kinder. And, by the same token, we're going to have some people that are going to be more and more like that, and others that might appear to be exactly the opposite of that. And that's just because there's an opposition in all things. And you've got this situation where, on the one hand, we'll have people going into fifth dimensional experience, and some people going back into what's going to seem like second dimensional experience. For every action, there has to be an equal opposite reaction. And sometimes I wonder if that's why we get more and more people that seem to be flat earth followers right now. It's like, is it because there's an equal number of people that are going to the next perspective or next dimension that we end up having some that kind of retrace? And I actually do think there might be some merit to that. I'm not trying to knock on any of the folks that are in the flat earth camp, but it's certainly a limited perspective when you're not seeing the third dimension of reality. But having said that, I'm just grateful that we're going to be coming off of quarantine here, hopefully pretty soon. I think that the social distancing thing is going to likely last. It's interesting, I go out every once in a while, and I go to a store, and you just see people like not really wanting to talk to each other, which is kind of bizarre for me to witness that. And then also, when my parents came over for my wife's birthday yesterday, my parents-in-law, we weren't sure whether we should hug or it's such a weird, awkward situation to be in. But, we are all just going to have to muddle through it, I think, and we're all going to get there. I do think, though, that people will start to recognize the importance in life of things that they thought were not so important. And I also believe that this quarantine period is long enough that it's breaking people of some of the habits that we've had. And those habits might be workaholism. I think some of those habits might be unhealthy decisions that we've basically kind of gotten addicted to and stuck with, and myself included. I am so used to it. And as most men, I'd say this is one of the things that men struggle with from time to time. Most men tend to associate what they do with who they are. And so it's been more challenging for some men, I think, to be at home and not necessarily being able to associate their identity with what they do on a day-to-day basis. Not that they're no longer working, although the unemployment rate has definitely spiked. I do believe that that's a challenge that people are going through right now as well, which is, is what I do consistent with who I am now? And I think that's going to be a really big question that people are asking. And candidly, it's even a question I'm asking. Are all the things that I am doing in my career and life consistent with who I am? Not the other way around. Or, it's not like I'm focused on you know, here are the things that I do, and therefore all of my personal life stuff has to be consistent with that. And I will say that, you know, as a person who's been in executive leadership in companies, I would say we're taught the opposite. You know, we're definitely taught and led to believe the opposite, which is, you know, if you're a CEO of a public company, you've got to act a certain way. You cannot do certain things. It may be that you love geometry, but you're not going to be out there talking about geometry in particular, for example, because people might think you're nuts. So, you know, those are the types of things I think people are going to go through shifts on, because now it's identity of self, of who we are, and the I am, and the acceptance of who I am. And then that, combining that with a lifestyle and a work environment and a career that's consistent with who I am, rather than getting my personal life consistent with my professional life. I don't know if that addresses the topic well enough for people, but certainly that's how I feel about things. And I definitely am asking some big questions right now. So someone wrote on here, Plasia Schmidt says, I experience while working all of the sudden memories from my life, childhood, and they feel like they're just now, as if time and space is mixed up. This is pretty new. Okay, so yes, I've also been having similar experiences where I've been remembering things from my childhood that I, quite frankly, put away for years and years and years and not really focused on. But now I'm having to revisit some of those things. And some of those things were deep, dark areas in my own psyche that I had kind of repressed and denied even existing. And that's the thing, is that when we choose through this sequence of life, going over and over and over again to deny a certain aspect of ourselves, even our memories will change. Even our perspectives and our views on what happened and occurred can sometimes change. And particularly with abuse, whether it's, you know, emotional abuse or physical abuse or sexual abuse, people, and this is very well documented and understood, will often go into denial and not even remember what happened. And it's important that we can go back and forgive, because in order to forgive, sometimes you have to be able to remember what actually occurred. It is becoming more and more the case than not that people are experiencing a different association with time. And that time itself seems to be running slower or faster for some people. You might be experiencing different dimensions of time throughout your lifetime in this life, or it might even be including another life. I'll give you one example. I had this, I'm a member of this group called Young Presidents Organization. I've been in it for about 20 years. And I was asked to join this new group. I graduated when I turned 50. And we go into this group of, like, we're still called Young Presidents, even though we're not young anymore. So we like to joke, it's called YPO Gold, and the G is silent for old. So, but I was asked to give kind of a life story, and they'd set the moderator had set it up so that for this group of 10 or so people that I'm with, they wanted me to tell my life story from the time I'm like 5 years old. And so they had a little card that says 5 years old, another card that says 10 years old, another card that says 15 years old. And I'm supposed to stand on each of these cards and explain the situation I'm in at that age and what I'm going through at that exact moment of time. And it was weird for me because I was feeling already a little bit bizarre that day for some reason. And I stood on one of the cards, and I was trying to remember back to when I was 5 years old, and I started almost describing it. And I noticed that what was coming out of my mouth was not from this lifetime. And what I was remembering was not at all from this lifetime. It was a completely different lifetime. In fact, I couldn't even remember my current lifetime when I was 5 years old. And it was so weird because I was on the wrong track all of a sudden. And I had to ask if I could go again at a future date because I literally couldn't remember my life from this life. And that's the first time that I've ever experienced that. I don't think it was a senior moment. It was literally, I was experiencing a different dimension of time, and I could vividly describe, and I could see it in my own mind, this other dimensional experience of time. And that was just the most bizarre feeling for me because I felt completely dissociated with this timeline. So don't be surprised if you start experiencing things like that. That's not out of the norm. as you start to understand. The first step to higher awareness is to recognize and to overcome any denials, and also to be able to know that you actually can access those things. So whether you were questioning or wondering, you definitely can. You know, my first experience with a dissociation with time, I guess, was when I was a missionary in South Korea, and I was 19 years old. This would have been in like 1989, and I remember I had a girlfriend that was waiting for me back at college, and she was driving back from university over Christmas break back to her house in Nebraska at the time. And I remember being asleep one night and having a very vivid dream of her being in a terrible car accident. And in this dream, she was driving a beige Toyota. She was driving with one of my other friends, and they were driving back together to Nebraska from Utah for the Christmas break. And she fell asleep at the wheel in my dream. And I'd never seen this car before. I didn't even know whose car it was, but I saw her in this beige Toyota. And, you know, in Nebraska, the roads are really, really straight and really long. And so you can fall asleep pretty easily. And that's what she did in my dream. She fell asleep and she rolled into a ditch. And I remember seeing her, I can still see it vividly right now, with blood all over her face. She had dyed her hair a different blondish color. She had been kind of a brunette before, and in my dream. And I immediately saw also in the dream that the guy that was sitting next to her in the front seat was clearly badly injured, and I felt like he was dead. And I freaked out. I woke up in the middle of the night. I woke up my missionary companion, who was a Korean guy, Sogum One was his name. And I said, you know, Gum One, what, I just had this horrible dream, and my girlfriend got in a bad car accident and she rolled the car. I should call the mission president and ask him if I can have permission to call home, because we weren't allowed to call home at the time. And so basically I called the mission president and I said, listen, I had this horrible dream. And he said, look, it's almost Christmas. There's only a few days left. You're going to call home on Christmas. You're allowed to call home on Christmas. Just ask then. And I'm like, but what if this is really serious? What if this is really serious? And so he wouldn't let me call. And I ended up calling on Christmas Day. And I remember when I called, my parents said, hey, we're going to call you back. And I didn't understand why. They lived in Nebraska also at the time. And they called me back at my house about 30 minutes later. And I hadn't talked to them for like 6 or 7 months. I was pretty new as a missionary. I'd been out for about 6 or 7 months at the time. And so I was excited to talk to them and everything. And I was obviously homesick and living in South Korea in a very, very, you know, not a city type of a place. I was in the middle of the country. And my girlfriend immediately got on the phone and she said, hi, Robert, how are you? And her name was Tasha. And I thought, oh, I'm so relieved, because I thought for sure, you know, you'd been in this horrible car accident. And I saw you in this horrible car accident. It was so vivid. You know, it was really, really bad. And I, you know, I had this dream. I think it was on like the 21st or something of December. And she went dead silent on me and said nothing more. And she said, no, I'm okay. I'm okay. And I told my parents about it as well. Well, about a week later, I got a letter in the mail that was sent before I spoke to them, because this was snail mail days. There were no email at the time. So we had fax simile that we could use, or we would, and that was very expensive to send a fax home. So we were just doing regular, like writing letters type of thing. And I got a letter from her that was written on like the 23rd or 24th of December. And it basically told me about how she'd been in a terrible car accident on the 21st, and that she fell asleep at the wheel of this beige Toyota. And I even remember the detail of the license plate number and everything. That was how detailed this dream was. And that my friend was unfortunately killed tragically in the car accident, and that they were not good. They'd made a decision not to tell me because they didn't want to ruin my Christmas day in the mission field. And come to find out, the moment that I had the dream was actually 9 hours before it actually happened. And it was so detailed, this dream, it literally, I saw, I had a remote view. Here I was in South Korea, and halfway across the planet, 9 hours later, exactly as I had dreamed it, happened. So I don't believe that psychic phenomenon is limited in any way, shape, or form to people who are ascended masters, or people who are able to achieve a higher degree of awareness or perception. And I remember that was probably the last time that happened for about 7 or 8 years. And then I had another circumstance that was very similar to this, but in a totally different way. But I had a remote view and I could see forward. So I've always been known as being kind of prescient and being able to see the future. And that was, kind of a major hallmark of my life and career, because people thought I was a visionary and I could always kind of pick what was going to happen in the future before it happened. And I would somehow always be pretty accurate, I would say, in being able to make those assessments and on what was going to happen in markets, what was going to happen, personally, what was going to happen to my friends. I mean, I could literally see around corners, I guess, but never to the degree that I just discussed with you guys, except for a couple of other occasions. So I think it's something that psychic phenomena we can tap into. All of us have it in our ability to do so, but we start believing the rhetoric, we start believing the counter talk or the negative self-doubt speech that goes in our own mind, which says, no, you can't do that. That can't be possible. That's not consistent with materialism science. But yet most people would basically say that they've had psychic phenomenon experience before. And I'm definitely in that realm. And I have had many times, I guess, across the different moments of my life that have been important moments, I guess, for me to look back on. But now it's very different, because now I understand that I can access these things. I regularly direct my intention and my focus to being able to see these things. And, it's funny. I used to probably, like a lot of people, I used to probably look at things like astrology and say, hey, astrology, there's something to it. Everybody knows this. Everyone still asks, what's your sign and all that kind of stuff. And now I believe fundamentally there's something major to it, because I think it provides us with the ability to be able to interpolate the world a lot better and faster, because we start to accept the notion of a higher self. Because if you believe in astrology, there has to be kind of some relationship in your own mind with what we experience here and this notion of higher self, or some architect, whether you want to call it higher self or whether you want to call it God or something, some higher intelligence or higher architect than what we are. And it might be I watched a film last night by Eric Weinstein, where he was talking about his geometric unity theory. And he was talking about consciousness being sort of akin to the hand that draws itself. Right, it's like the Escher drawing, where it basically shows a hand drawing itself, and the consciousness itself might just actually be that intelligence that is able to do that. But I do believe all of us have the ability to tap into higher dimension, and that we can point our direction and focus into seeing and experiencing things that we wouldn't otherwise believe that we could. And so if you didn't know that you could do that, now you know. So start directing your intention towards that. And I'd love to hear about your experiences, if any, and don't try to play like, I need a sign, because that's not really belief in it, right? You have to really believe in it, and you have to really understand that it is absolutely true that you have the ability to access this extra dimensional perception around you. And there's nothing weird about it. It's just part of being human. So someone says here, Stephen Hardy's writing the book Dean Koontz wrote in 1981. It says predicted China. Oh, okay. Yeah. This is this whole thing about coronavirus and how it was predicted in 1981 in the Dean Koontz book. I did see that. That was fascinating, but I'm not at all surprised, because I think there have been people that have been able to access different dimensions of time realities for a long time. And it's just they weren't listened to. they were sort of like probably laughed at. But, you know, for people that have never experienced a higher dimension, how could you ever describe to them what it's like to experience it? And then for those people that have not experienced it, they're going to feel like they've been slighted because, well, they don't have this special power. Well, actually, all of us do. It's a function of your perception of the world and whether or not you believe you have the power to do it. And it looks like some people are saying that as well. Brigida Muse is saying, I mentioned yesterday, I paint things before they happen. This is how I lost my brother. I was also visited by guides who prepared me. Yeah, and you know, people will sometimes ask me about guides and astrology and all this kind of stuff. You know, I would say that I'm much more tuned into it now. I actually went to Chicago to teach at Northwestern Business School that I do every year in January. And I met up with one of the guys that follows me on Instagram, who's also a big social influencer himself. And he's a great guy. Charity's his name. And so I basically met up with him, and he taught me how to read astrological charts. I never thought that I'd learn how to read astrological charts, but I did. And it's been useful for me to understand it and also to understand how tarot works. Now, it's not that I spend my time, you know, pulling tarot cards and stuff like that, because that's not what I do. But I've always I've never turned it down when someone asked me, hey, would you like to have your tarot read? I've never turned it down. And that in and of itself was kind of powerful and convincing to me on a certain level. But I believe that each and every one of us have the ability to tap into this. It's a matter of deciding to do so, setting your intention and focus on that thing, and being able to access it regularly. And, you know, the more you get used to it, the easier it is to access. I will definitely say that. What's my take on crop circles? I believe that some crop circles are clearly fake. Okay. But some crop circles are not fake. I don't believe that at all. And in fact, there have been times when I have drawn something and posted it on Instagram or Facebook, and within a day, somebody who follows me has basically said, wow, the drawing you did became a crop circle within 24 hours of when you drew it, like the identical drawing. And that kind of freaked me out. And that's happened to me probably about 5 or 6 times, where within a day of me drawing something, a crop circle ends up somewhere in the world. Usually it's the UK, but not only in the UK. And that was kind of like, how could that be, right? That is really bizarre. I'll tell you a funny story that, you know, Nassim is a real scientist, but when he came out to visit with me, he did point out to me that that when he saw the logo for one of my companies, that I needed to be reminded that that actually was a crop circle in 2012. And he showed me the crop circle. I'd never seen it before. And it was identical to my logo. And the crop circle came up within a few days. I think it was like 2 or 3 days of when I designed the logo, which was super bizarre. And how, you know, that in and of itself had an impact on whether or not he was going to decide to have the meeting with me. And I'm not saying that he does all that type of stuff, because he's not into all that type of stuff. But I do believe that there is something with resonance and thought. The entire universe is thought. The entire universe is mind. The entire universe is frequency. And so there's probably portals that tap into that frequency that get magnified, that then can create things like crop circles. And it might not just be that. I mean, it's geometry as well. You know, maybe you've maybe seen that this Japanese professor Emoto had done this research on water, and he put different words on the outside of the water, and he had this water that would have love written on the side, and another water bottle, a glass bottle, that would have, you know, hate or anger on the side. And then he would flash freeze them and take, you know, like microscopic photographs of the crystalline structure of the frozen water. And there was a dramatic difference between the crystalline structure of water that had the words like love, where you had these beautiful, perfect geometries that emerged out of the flash freezing and the photography associated with it. And for the ones that were kind of like hate had this totally different look to the water. It was completely dissociated from how you would think about this beautiful structure of how water can look, which would be an icosahedral structure. And instead, it was kind of like broken up and all over the place. And this kind of experimentation has been done many times. I think that subtly our thoughts are impacting everything around us all the time, just like a cymatics plate is impacted by the tone that's associated and it's in training against. I think our world and our existence around us entrains to what our thought patterns are and what our thought frequencies are. So it's best, in my opinion, to go ahead and be the fool that we talked about yesterday that perceives the paradise. Because the fool that perceives the paradise will end up experiencing that. Whatever you judge is what you end up getting more of around you. The stuff that you have accepted, right? If you're judging negativity, then you're going to get more and more negativity. If you're judging hatred or anger or crime and all this, you're just going to get more and more of that in your world. Whereas if you're not making those judges, and I mean even at a subconscious or very subtle level, then the things that you are judging, that if you believe you're in a paradise, you really are in a paradise. And I talked about this in one of the classes not long ago, which was that when I went to Japan with a group of my friends, we stopped at a Shinto shrine and I met a monk that was there. It was one of the Shinto monks. And he said to me in Japanese, and I speak Japanese, he said, "Can you tell me the difference between heaven and hell?" And I said, "I'm sure you're going to tell me." You asked me the question. And he said, in hell, you've got all the abundance around you, and the temptation of all that abundance is clear there for you every single day. But you have these super long fingernails and you can't grab any of that abundance. You can't experience that abundance. It's impossible for you to. And so it's like everything's within your reach, but you can have and experience none of it. And that's hell. And he said, heaven, all the exact same conditions exist. The only difference is that you spirit the abundance and you feed your neighbors and they feed you back. And that is heaven. And I thought, that's really interesting. What a different perspective. You know, that literally this existence can be either a heaven or hell, and it really depends on how we decide to experience it. That's the most powerful thing I can say to you guys here today. So someone wrote on here about telepathy, astral journeys, communication between worlds. It is time for these topics to become mainstream discussions. Children need nurturing so these gifts are not shut down. Absolutely. Absolutely. It's just like, you know, one of the things that I'm trying to do really hard this go round as a parent, relatively new parent, is not to say to my son or my daughter, you know, don't cry, don't be a baby, right? All those things that it was unacceptable to express any kind of emotion when I was a child. And that's how I grew up, but I don't necessarily want them to grow up with that. I'd like them to grow up being able to express their emotions and not hide them and most importantly, not hide them from themselves. And I think that's something that I would really change. And the second thing is, you know, encourage your children when they say they've got an imaginary friend or that they've got a friend that comes visit them or, you know, or that they're meeting with my daughter is basically talking all the time about how her great-grandfather, who passed away long ago, comes to visit her. And we'd never even talked to her about him. And we encourage her to tell us about it rather than to just say, no, it's not real because we're freaking out, right? And I think that's a different way that we should be thinking about the world, because as we understand that dimensions of time are different than what we had supposed, then we need to start modeling that around ourselves as well. And the people that are consistent with that, just as I had said, you know, I want to make sure that my life and career and my work activities are consistent with who I am rather than the other way around. That also needs to be true as it relates to how we perceive our relationships and friendships. I think many people on this call are going to go through dramatic shift in who you would call your friends and the people that you're going to associate with more versus less in this next paradigm. So Trisha Kirby says people don't realize that they are vibrating frequencies in their thoughts and emotions and behavior. When they judge others, that's a frequency. Choose positive frequencies and choose solution-oriented thinking rather than criticism. Right. Create heaven on earth. I could not agree with you more, Trisha. A great comment. Would it be a good idea to build a house based on squaring the circle? Huh. You know what's so funny? I wish I could show you guys this, but I bought the house that I live in, and it is really funny because the whole thing is based on squaring the circle. Now, I did not even realize it when I bought it, and it looks like, it has these big round windows like this with a cross right down the center of it, and then squares around those as well. And it's so funny because when I moved into this house about a year and a half ago, I didn't really think of that at all. But then I did notice, I was like, wait a minute, this kind of looks like the prime number pattern. And I laughed and joked about it with Alan and others. They're like, wow, your house is like the prime number house. And so I ended up in a house that is already built on squaring the circle, which I had no clue about, but it just turned out to be that way. But I have been asked several times to do projects in geometry to help design buildings and architecture, and I just have not done it yet, but I don't doubt that I probably will. There are a number of architects who've asked if they could partner with me on different projects, and I would be very happy to do that type of thing. I'd love to see building structures that look like tesseracts. I think that would be super cool. But finding the balance, I'm not sure that it has to be squaring the circle. What I do think is important in architecture and in art in general is finding a balance between the linear and nonlinear, the rational and the irrational, the masculine and the feminine. So all of my artwork, I try to, whether it's drawings that you guys see or sculpting, and I'm about to start another sculpture here in the not too distant future. And I just wait for those to come out. Like it's like a birthing process almost. But it's always about finding that balance, that beautiful balance, not only in the proportionality of phi, which already has the feminine and the masculine embedded within that. That's why phi is so beautiful. But because you can think of it as spiral, right, which is feminine, but also it's linear because the proportions are linearized. So you've got 1.618 times the 1, right, which is how you do it. And so the phi proportions already embed within it the concepts of squaring the circle. The phi proportions already encompass, as it were, this notion of balance between masculine and feminine in art. And art as an architecture, I think, benefits by that balance. And if you accomplish that balance through squaring the circle, great. If you accomplish it through other means, but still balancing masculine and feminine archetypes into that structure, then I think you will be very happy with the result. Do you think good people can experience bad things? My whole perception on what is good and bad has dramatically shifted, right? Because first of all, I have to ask myself, does what I'm experiencing have anything to do with what will benefit me? And it's hard to be honest with yourself like that, because when you sit here and sit back and say, well, wait a minute, am I taking that position politically, or am I taking that position philosophically or judgmentally simply because I believe that if it goes the other direction, it will benefit the other party and not me, or that it may benefit the other party at my expense, right? And so when I start to ask myself that question, I'll give you an example, right? When Donald Trump first became president, it drove me nuts. I'll be honest with you, because everything I've learned in public speaking and how to address a crowd, I guess, I thought, gosh, this guy, just like, he's hopeless. I could not believe it. And the things that he loved to spout off, it's like, it didn't matter what it was. It had to be some competition between him and somebody else, where somebody else was losing and a loser by extension, and he was the only one winning. And I had to stop myself and say, wait a minute, why am I experiencing this? Why is it getting under my skin so much? And it's interesting also because, you know, over the last few years, there are probably two major archetypes that society has really, really gotten more of than we thought we would ever need or want to get of these particular people. And one of them is Donald Trump. And the other one is Elon Musk. And it's funny because I get told all the time that I look like Elon. And I'm a big fan. I mean, Elon Musk is like somebody that I definitely think is amazing. And I think he's done amazing things. But I used to always look, you know, sort of reprehensibly, I guess, upon the Donald. And until the moment that I determined that the reason why I was getting triggered by Donald Trump and the way he spoke and the way he conducted himself and the way he would talk about, you know, anybody or anything is when I started realizing the characteristics and traits in him that I was so triggered by were actually the characteristics and traits that are in myself that I wanted nobody else to see. And so I had tried really hard to put on a mask to not show any of these traits so that I would never be associated with these things. Now, this is what happens when the crime scene happens and somebody kills somebody, and the first thing that person does is blame somebody else because it's deflection, right? Well, that's what we're doing when we're making judgments of other people. We're deflecting the things we don't like about ourselves so that nobody associates us with those things, when actually it's our own shame that has driven us to that perception in the first place. And all of us are 100% good and 100% bad. There is no good or bad. There's no perfect person. There's no perfect person. There's only people that either accept themselves for who they are, and the both sides of that, right? And that sometimes, you know, you'll do good things, sometimes you'll do bad things. And the people that punish themselves more and more and more for that which is bad or what they assume is unsavory or unattractive about themselves are the ones that carry more and more challenging karma to break down that later needs to dissolve till you get past it. And as soon as I realized that the certain traits and characteristics that Donald Trump had were traits and characteristics that I had all my life tried to suppress against, then I realized, why do I need to be triggered by Donald Trump anymore then? And combining that with the discussion we had yesterday about that was around the same time that I decided to stop judging and start saying, I am that I am, every time that I'm about to judge something. Instead of me putting it on somebody else, I would put it on myself and say, I am that I am. And as soon as that happened, then all of a sudden it didn't bother me to watch Donald Trump anymore. It didn't bother me at all because I had been projecting onto him what in his personality triggered me and reminded me that I am also those things. And what is the definition of good and bad? My whole life, I've been very judgmental of laziness. I think it was because my father said to me, you know, son, you need to work hard. You need to do this. You need to do that. You know, you have a career, blah, blah, blah. And he was right on all those things. And I've, you know, largely followed what he said. He's been a great dad. I have no complaints about my family or my life growing up. But I remember that, and I hope my brother's not on here, but my brother was very different. He didn't listen to all that stuff. And in fact, when it was time to mow the lawn growing up, because I had jobs from the time I was 14 years old, I detasseled corn in the fields from the time I was 14 years old until, you know, I was 17. Every summer, I'd pull corn stalks right at the top out of it. You'd have to desex the corn. It is like truly slave labor. And every morning I'd get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and I'd go. My brother never did that job. You know, I worked in the garden center at Kmart, right? I had every kind of like job that nobody should love or want. And the strange thing is, I don't remember a job I hated. In my entire life, I don't remember a single job that I hated. And I enjoyed every one of them. There was a certain aspect to the corn detasseling that I thought was kind of cool. And I do remember thinking next year I want to get promoted to be a foreman, so I don't have to be the one that is getting like cuts on my arms and everything just from those leaves of corn, which are like paper cuts. I mean, it was not easy work. 105 degrees outside and 95% humidity. It was pretty rough. But I'm so grateful for having done it now. But I remember my brother, he had a totally different philosophy on life. And he would say to me, he's like, why do you do all this work? You know, or it'd be like my turn to mow the front yard. He's supposed to mow the backyard. He was a younger brother than me. And he wouldn't mow the backyard. And so I was responsible because I was the elder of the two of us. And so it just became so much a pain in my butt to go and try to get him off the couch that I just said, you know what? I'm just going to mow the backyard. If it was his turn to mow the backyard, I just do both of them. And, you know, because it's just easier to deal with it that way. And I used to get so judgmental, and he's a great guy now. He really is a wonderful person. But I used to get so judgmental of laziness. And I think maybe it's because I often wondered, what would it be like just to do nothing and to be lazy? And could I accept myself if I were? And I still have challenges with that to this day. So, you know, I think that what we determine, and I used to think laziness is bad, bad, bad. Well, I'm not of that mindset anymore. I just wish that I was more accepting of the concept and embracing of it so that I didn't have to judge it in other people. Okay, so someone wrote, Trisha again wrote, I was shown a vision of him winning the election was wait and see. It'll be a good thing because this country has a lot that needs healing and light brought to it. For better or worse, he triggers people. I could not agree with you more. Again, I think, you know, I'm glad Donald Trump was president because it helped me to dissolve some of the karmic loop that I had on the things about him that triggered me to remember who I am, that I am both. Yeah, and Danielle says, and your brother knew that you would mow the lawn. Yeah, true. So it was my fault. It was like my brother, we are products of our own making. And that literally is the way life is, right? We're constantly doing things that we don't realize the unintended consequences of. Greetings, everyone. 50, you're only 28. Hi, Charles. How are you? Charles Peck came with us to Egypt. And we had a wonderful time, life-changing experience there. So suspension of judgment creates a space for happiness. I could not agree with you more. And then someone says, Anna Crozier says, these understandings are explained further in the pre-Vedic Maya manuscripts. Let's see if I can see what other comments or questions might be from the Instagram crowd. Let's see if the virus is real. Proof will come in 2 weeks after all the people that went to the beach this weekend. You know what? I would say the virus is real. It's interesting because I used to have someone that worked on my team when I worked for a company 20 years ago called Coherent, which became Luminous, which means light. And I was reading the New York Times this weekend, and her name was Kim Bellow. And I started reading this article about this family in Massachusetts that had, the husband who was 49 years old, almost died of coronavirus and was on a ventilator for like 36 days or something. And then additionally, it got so bad that they decided to put him under in like a medically induced coma, and they put him on bypass. I mean, that's really bad. And the guy was a super healthy person, and I knew him also, and I obviously knew the wife, and I was like, could this be the same family? Until I kept scrolling down, and I found that indeed it was. It was this person I had worked with 20 years ago, and I knew quite well. And her husband almost died, and thankfully, there's an incredible story about his recovery in Massachusetts and how he came off of the ventilator, came off of the bypass, and the heart-lung machine, and was able to fully recover, which is like super rare. Once you go on the ventilator on coronavirus, odds are you're not going to come off. And that's not the only person I've known. You know, as you get older, you'll start to realize that the world is smaller and smaller, and there really is only a few degrees of separation between you and, you know, virtually every person on the planet. And so you will know people that have been dramatically impacted by coronavirus. And for those that survive, the statistics are also starting to show that the damage that is done to your respiratory system and the cardiac system might be with you a lot longer than just the time that you're on the ventilator. In fact, it may lead to, it's kind of like rubella, right? You can have a fever as a child and then later on end up with a heart murmur because of the fever you had as a child. Or that you might need to even have a mitral valve replacement in your heart. And that's a pretty serious surgical procedure. So, you know, I don't believe all the people that would say that the whole thing is fake. Now, if you want to say to me that the entire universe is fake, I might be more accepting of that than the concept that that coronavirus or what we're experiencing within this realm is fake. I also want to say that the more you spend time focusing on things like conspiracy theories, the more they will manifest around you, because you will attract what you judge until you no longer judge what you attract. You will have a lot more conspiracy stuff around you the more time you spend thinking about it. Trust me. And then when you start thinking that way and you start recognizing something exists and you've now corroborated that, or somebody has shown you, hey, this is exactly what it was, just as we were fearing, then, you know, you become like the hammer syndrome, which is once you're a hammer, then everything looks like a nail. And I would encourage you to start perceiving the world around you in the foolish way, right? Which is the happy fool. And there's a reason in tarot, I believe, that the Fool card is so important. The Fool card actually represents both. There also the Hierophant card does, and the High Priestess and all of that. But the Fool card in tarot does represent something really important, that we need to become fooled to recognize that we are fools, and that when we're fools, we can actually we can be the oblivious happy fool, because we're perceiving the world around us, even though it's challenging and bad, by recognizing and determining that it's good and for our benefit, that the universe doesn't happen to us, but rather happens for us. Then all of a sudden, that is the pathway that you will end up being on, that the things in your life will change towards your benefit. And I've seen it, you know, I've seen it so many times. I'll give you an example. There's someone who's invested in my companies, and she's probably the wealthiest person that's a female, very successful business person. And she sometimes is sort of like a little bit made fun of by her peers, because her peers are like, wow, she's just so positive all the time. And, you know, she just has no clue about how difficult things really are. She has no clue. And yet somehow every time she makes investments based on that philosophy, she runs into the investment that the other parties say, no way, it's too risky, too dangerous, too bad, no way, don't do it. And she has like doubled and tripled her money multiple times over, because she's just this happy-go-lucky person who believes that everything is going to go well. And it does for her. And it's funny, because the people that are supposed to be smarter, that went to MBA school, that went to Wharton, that understand all the risk and challenges and difficulties, they can never get out of their own way. They're constantly stuck on the obstacle that they can never reach their destination. They'll never, ever, you know, they think that the obstacle is the whole thing. And the more they focus on that obstacle, the bigger and more challenging it becomes. Start imagining that the world around you is easy. Start judging that it's for your benefit. Start seeing that, you know, judging is probably not the better way to say it, but start perceiving that everything happens for you rather than against you. Find a silver lining in everything that happens. And if you can take that silver lining, you can make that the reality, so that even the stuff that's the worst stuff that could happen to you, you'll say later on down the path, that was the best thing that ever happened to me. Imagine yourself saying that and thinking that. These are powerful things. I used to buy watches all the time, right? I used to buy watches. Whenever I'd feel fearful of something, I would go and buy an expensive watch. And for me, it was kind of like the concept of burning the ships. I was going to take a big risk, and I was not going to look back, and I was going to burn the ship that could take me to my safety. And when I had no choice but to succeed, I found myself succeeding more often. So what I would do is I would, if I'd wake up with anxiety, I'd go and buy the watch that I really liked or I wanted, right? I wanted that I'd been looking at for a long time. Now I could care less about watches, but I have so many watches, but I literally don't use them. I just use my digital watch now. And really, I don't even need that because I carry around a phone that has a clock on it all day long. But the reason I buy a watch is because I would look at my watch and I would give myself the watch as a gift to celebrate the success over fear that I was experiencing. So I would look at this watch. I have another one of my watches here charging. I would look at this watch and I would say, you know what? I'm going to give myself as a gift for overcoming this challenge, whatever I'm feeling the anxiety for, because I'm going to celebrate before I've actually achieved it. And if I embed it and imprint it in my mind's eye that I've actually given myself as a gift, like, you know, I splurged for myself and I bought myself this gift. I was afraid we were going to run out of money, or I was afraid I was going to mess up and fail at this major conference, or, you know, or a product launch, or whatever it was. It doesn't matter what it is. And I would instead buy this watch. It would be a new watch. And until that time of success, I would wear that watch every day. And I'd look at the watch. And every time I'd look at the watch, I wouldn't actually look at it for the time. I might look at it for the time sometimes, but usually I would look at the watch and remember giving myself the gift of this watch after I succeeded. So it's almost like I collapsed a wave function in the future and brought it forward or to now, right? I brought it to today rather than 6 months or 7 months out in the future. Most people would buy a gift for themselves after they've had their success already and they've materialized it. No, I would do it the other way around. I'd buy myself a gift as soon as I was going up against the risk. And I would use that as a mechanism to collapse the future possibility and turn it into the now. And it never failed me, never once. Now, interestingly, there were times that I had challenges along the way, and even sometimes where I felt like I was gonna fail or about to fail or perceived that maybe momentarily there was a failure. It only took a few seconds for me to flip it around in my own mind and to say, now, whatever just happened could be the best thing that happened to me or could be the worst thing. My judgment of what it is will be the determining factor on what it actually is. And that is such an important concept to learn and integrate. And, you know, literally, we think it's very hard to change the world, but I fundamentally believe that it's not so difficult. It's only as difficult as changing your perception, because this world can be a total paradise on earth if we decide it's so. I'm 100% convinced of that. And you know what? Someone said, that sounds like a smart way to manage the subconscious. It's exactly a way to manage the subconscious. When people, you know, this morning I got a message from someone who has been following my work recently, and she lives in Germany. And she wrote me this long kind of paragraph on how since she started following this work, you know, kind of like a lot of things in her life are starting to kind of feel upside down. Because, you know, she hates Donald Trump, for example. And she's like, Donald is bad. And so, you know, I cannot find a way to accept someone like Donald Trump. I want not to be that person. I never want to be that person. And I wrote back to her and I said, listen, don't beat up yourself. You know, you're not going to work out the dissolution of ego in the course of a few weeks. It's not going to happen. You're being introduced to things right now that you're on a path that will step by step lead you to come to these decisions on your own as a natural consequence of the path that you are choosing day in and day out. And don't have this super huge expectation of, it's not like, oh, I'm going to be awakened now. Today, I'm a particular way, and tomorrow I'm going to be a totally different person. Or today, I perceive the world this way, and tomorrow I'm going to perceive it completely differently. Well, it does start with a choice. That is true. That part is absolutely true. But it is embedded through your own habit. And you start to break down those habits. As you break, and whatever you do for 21 days, it becomes your new habit. So as you break down those habits of the way you were doing and perceiving and seeing the world around you, and starting to expand your mind and perception to a broader viewpoint, then you'll notice that the world around you is changing. And the things that you noticed before, you don't even notice anymore. You don't even care about. I mean, I used to not even be able to like turn around when there was a news article on Donald Trump. And now it's like, I don't even care. It doesn't even matter to me. So that is, I guess, my discussion for the day. I've got time for one other question, it looks like. So let's see. I will unfold into the person I will be. Yeah, I will unfold into the person you will be. Everybody is in that same place. Greetings from Holland. Thanks a lot for sharing. Ahamaka is the perfect medicine to sink in deep nature or to crash. Laziness. Okay, I agree. I want to be lazy. I want to get on a boat and just sit on the boat. It'd be kind of nice and be happy with that and not be thinking, oh, I should be doing something. Employing an educational system rooted and based in providing life-changing experiences would serve our society and planet well. I totally agree. And I think that, we spend so much time, one of the sad travesties of our educational system today, and again, it's just leading to this next evolution, so there's nothing negative about it, but we kind of teach everybody that you're not supposed to keep learning after you're 22, unless you're going on to some postgraduate study, and then maybe it's 30. I think learning and evolution is a lifelong endeavor. It's a lifelong choice. And the more we allow ourselves to learn and relearn and look at things with fresh eyes, you can see things totally differently. I didn't love trigonometry when I was in school, and I'm now fallen in love with trigonometry because it has revealed something to me and with a meaning that I could never have understood when I was in 8th or 9th or 10th grade. And the real benefit of trigonometry only came as a construct of philosophical thought for me. And its importance only became embedded into my psyche as I could benefit from the evolution related to it. So I don't like this idea of like having only one career. I think that, it's time itself and our limitation and perception of time that leads us into, this scarce notion of having only one career in life. And it is time itself, that illusion of time, that leads us to believe that therefore, if we're only going to have one career, we have to study, all of our studies have to be done by the time we're in our mid-20s. And I just don't think that's true. That's a very limited view of the world. But I mean, you're trying to tell me that someone who studied physics in college is going to know more about physics than somebody who studies it for 30 years after their age of college time is finished? Come on. It's not going to be the case at all. So I really encourage you all to expand your thinking and perceive the world differently around you. And I wish you a great week. We will not have class tomorrow, but we will again on Thursday. So I look forward to seeing everyone, and have a great rest of your day and tomorrow, and see you on Thursday. Bye.